Welcome back everyone to another episode of Pineleaf Answers, where today I will be answering the question of what is my favorite class. I guess it's pretty obvious based on the class that I'm on right now that my favorite class is the Warden. And anyone who knows me or has seen any of my YouTube series will pretty much have guessed that by now, especially considering that I use the name Pineleaf and that is the name of my wardens, or at least my main wardens on each of the servers. So the question is, why is the Warden my favorite class? And for that, I have 6 responses. Now, the first one is that the Warden is a class that works pretty well in both ranged and melee. Yes, they're a little bit stronger in melee than in ranged, but they do still have a significant ability to work in ranged combat. Sometimes when I'm playing a pure melee class, I get frustrated with roots and the like, and when I get frustrated and I can't get out, it's hard to have fun on the matter. So therefore, having the option to switch to ranged abilities is a nice thing to have. On the other hand, unlike many classes that have pure range abilities, we're not exactly squishy. Wardens might be in some ways slightly squishy, but certainly nowhere near as most of the pure ranged classes. Also, with ranged classes, you have the tendency that I sometimes lose suspension of belief when I'm playing a hunter and I'm continuing to fight a bow while someone's smashing me in the face. It just doesn't sound right. So therefore, I have a liking of playing the Warden, where, yes, if someone's smashing you in the face, you can switch to your melee skills because your ranged skills aren't as good at that point, so you might as well go to that. So therefore, it's something that I can actually agree with is reasonable. So therefore, the first thing is that's a class that's comfortable in both melee and in ranged combat. The second point are the matter of ports. Wardens are good. They have ports or musters that go just about everywhere. You might have slightly better on the ports if you are a hunter, especially if you're in a fellowship, but Wardens do have a pretty good port system myself, and in fact, if you look on this page right here, this page is filled with my ports, and I could go to a large number of places. Here are a number that's going all over area door, or at least for the most part here, down to area door. Actually, these are rep ones and standard ones. Here is the first line of them, so down here to area door, and then we have down here Ravananim, and with maybe a couple of them going into Gondor and Rohan, and then over here we have our ports over into the Minas Tirith area. So therefore, yes, quite a variety of ports, so I can get around reasonably well wherever I wish to go. So third, a good set of self-heals. Wardens are able to heal themselves if they're starting to get low or something like this. And in fact, some of the tanking they could do can be done by generating extra healing, and if they're healing themselves, then they're able to get enough hate of it in order to help keep the mobs on them. Number 4 is that Wardens have very few clickies. Most of the things that you have in Wardens are their gambits, and the gambits are activated through gambit builders. Yeah, I need a little bit of suspension of belief in order to take hold on this little concept in here, but it does fit how I'm able to play, because I can get along with handling 4 keys pretty well. If I try to use all of these by clicking on the keyboard, I will never be able to remember where anything is or find anything. Keeping it to a small number helps me much better. And there are some items though that you would have to click. For example, some of these auxiliary range skills need them. The things that set you up do, and the masteries do, but since I'm keeping my mouse down in these areas, I can usually handle them reasonably well. And if I fumble on them, I can always fall back to using the basic gambit builders in any case. So I always have that fallback. With any other class, some of them I've been starting to put my most basic skills down into 1 to 4 so that I can at least be able to use those on the keyboard. But in order to fully appreciate any other class, you are going to have to be hitting all these other skills, and I find that troublesome without clicking. And Terry Adwin has noted not only am I a clicker, I tend to be a slow clicker. So therefore, yes, I do prefer a class where I could do most of my stuff on just 4 keys. Number 5 is that we have a plausible weapon class here. The weapon loadout of a warden, which is shield with spear and javelin, sounds like something that could exist in the real world. In fact, it's probably something that you would have had in the ancient world. Alright, these javelins and spears pretty much look like the same, so let's face it, most likely in the real world they would have been just the exact same weapon and just used for different purposes. But yes, many of the ancient world warriors, yes, spear and shield, a pretty common one. On the other hand, some of the others, I have a little bit trouble in believing them, you could say, in some ways. For example, the dual-wielding style of many other classes, especially with the champion, where you very often are carrying 2 large weapons at the same time. If you ever see me play a champion, I usually prefer a large and a small because that's something you're more likely to run into. But I'm not exactly thinking that a dual-wielding is really an adventurer's type loadout. That's sounds like a duelist or self-defense type loadout rather than a adventuring type. So therefore, yeah, I have a little bit tougher time believing some of those combinations you have in there. But I can believe spear and shield. And of course, I've already talked about hunters, where I find it hard to believe when you're able to shoot your bow while someone is slapping you in the face. And of course, runekeepers, well, maybe a little bit over the top. Now, I do have to admit that guardians also can have a beleaguered one, sword and board. Captains, you can have sword and board, or you can have halberd. So the warden is not the only class that has a plausible weapon loadout. It's just that it's one more item that they are one of those classes that do. And finally, the wardens are a good solo class. I do a lot of solo play. I also do some work in the small fellowship area, and I do some skirmish raids. But most of the time, I'm doing solo work, and the wardens work very well on that. So in summary, I like the warden because I'm comfortable with a class that has skills in both melee and ranged. I like the ports. I like the self-heals. I appreciate it that it has only a small number of clickies, and that many of them you don't necessarily be using on the spot in combat, such as the ports, of course. We have a plausible weapon loadout, though that is definitely not an exclusive item in there, and they are a good solo class. So, that's it for my answer on why I feel that the warden is my favorite class. And until next time, this is Pineleaf Needles reminding you to skirmish responsibly.